we're going, we don't need roads.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Batman.
Hello, and welcome to the latest Moviescramble podcast, where we are treating you to another double bill ahead of one of summer's biggest cinematic releases. We are going to be talking to you about Rage, a feeling that John only has when Jeeves the butler serves his gin and tonic in the wrong glass. But we also have a special treat for you today. As it is Father's Day in the UK at point of recording, I am being joined by two of the internet's favourite daddies. It is John and Simmy. How are you both?
I am good, yes. I got a nice shirt from my son for Father's Day, which was quite nice as well. And they also gave me a card with a tenner in it. This is a standing joke. Anytime anybody gets a birthday card or anything, it's a tenner on a card that you get, which is obviously really nice, yeah. But I was thinking that you'd probably go along the lines of the daddy of the podcast with Thomas as well, so yeah.
That's good. Sammy, how's things? Good to have you back.
It's good to be back. Yeah, things are good with me. Like I was saying just before recording that, I've just been working away. And when I saw you while doing this, and I had previously just watched them, I thought, I just really want to have a chat about these films. Like I said, I don't really get a chance to have much discussion in work. I have a lot of casual conversation with people. I kind of start bringing up films after a session. I do have a lot of thoughts on both these films. I've just been kind of chomping at the bit to just chat with people about them.
Good. Well, this is the perfect place to do it. So, as I said, we have a double bill lined up for you. We are going to discuss 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later, which is perfect listening for those of you planning to go and see 28 Years Later this June. So let's start with the obvious, 28 Days Later. The film was written by Alex Garland and directed by Danny Boyle, hitting cinemas in 2002. It stars Cillian Murphy, Naomi Harris, Christopher Eccleston and Brendan Gleeson, to name but a few. The premise is simple. We, as viewers, are 28 days into a pandemic, but not the coughing and sneezing kind, one that infects people with pure blind rage. So, as we revisit 28 Days Later, what are your memories of going to see the film initially? Did you go and see it in the cinema? And how does it work several years down the line ahead of this new release? John?
I remembered that at the time, and I was massively impressed with it at the time. But for whatever reason, I don't think I've actually watched it since then, which is really kind of weird for a film that did come across as being so interesting, so stimulating, shall I say. I had a lot of thoughts about it at the time as well. So yes, going back to it was a bit of a joy, because obviously with the impending release of the new film, I'd kind of forgotten most of what I'd seen. You still see stuff about it, like the odd meme and things like that, and you go, oh yeah, I remember that, but I'd remembered very little about it outside of the shell of the story. So yeah, it was good to get back into it again. Definitely. Thomas?
Yeah, it was funny because then you're asking if memories of seeing this film, and I seen it when it came out. I could not tell you if I've seen it in the cinema or not. I just genuinely can't remember. I do know I had it in DVD, and I've seen it a load. It's like one of my favourite films. I've watched it so many times. I watched all the extras in the DVD, learned a lot about the film, but I hadn't seen it in years. I couldn't tell the last time I had seen it before I rewatched it the other week, and I couldn't find my DVD, so I had to rent it from Amazon. As much as I could remember all the beats and the story and the plot and everything, what really took me by surprise was how the film looked. And that's, and it's like, and well, I suppose we'll get into that later. I suppose we'll talk more in detail about the technical aspects of the film, but yeah, that was the thing that really took me by surprise. However, just to touch on that, it's the first time I've seen the film in years. I have probably not watched it on a flat screen 4K TV that's trying to upscale it. I've not definitely watched it on like a bigger screen. So I've always seen this movie more or less the way it was meant to be shown until recently, when it's been stretched out at a bigger telly.
Ah, right, okay. I watched it for the first time during the pandemic for shits and giggles. Seemed like appropriate watching, but I was really taken aback by it for several reasons, which we'll get into. But we'll start with performance, because obviously I feel like this was the film that sort of launched Cillian Murphy's career, or sort of made him more visible. And what do you think his portrayal of Jim is like in terms of evolving from sort of this vulnerable character who wakes up obviously not understanding what's happened in the world to essentially taking us through the rest of the film? Why do you think performance was deemed so compelling, I guess?
so naive to begin with. He's naive in a way because he wakes up obviously 28 days later after the rage epidemic, and he doesn't know what's going on. So he doesn't have like any sort of markers about what's actually happening. So the fact that Cillian Murphy can take him from that character, and then obviously there's a whole journey of him, and it's all really about survival, isn't it? And the things that he has to do in order to survive, and that kind of hardens him and changes him. And you can tell in the way that he actually brings sort of certain aspects to his performance. The sort of initially it's a sort of wonderment because he's just kind of wandering about, not really knowing what's going on. But then when he actually starts encountering, shall we call them zombies? Shall we not? Whatever. With the infected.
Yeah,
Danny,
I think the
Danny
infected,
Boyle doesn't call them
yeah.
zombies. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yep. So just call them infected then. It changes them, and it kind of his sort of naivety disappears very quickly when he has to do certain things in order to survive. And it shows in the way that he actually holds himself and everything. Just he becomes just more hard, if you like, and that comes through in the performance quite well as well. So yeah, I thought it was excellent. I thought it was really, really good for such a young actor to be able to do that, to be able to pull that off as well. Yeah, very, very good.
Yeah, just to echo what John was saying there, but bear in mind as well is that we all know Cillian Murphy from probably this film till now, and you think of the career he's had in that time, the iconic roles he has
I
played, the
know.
awards he has won. But going back to this, and like, as I was saying, I seen this film when it came out, I had no idea who Cillian Murphy was. It was more or less, I think in terms of the rest of the cast as well, they were all pretty much unknowns at the time. They're not the household names that they then become. It's very easy to kind of think back and realize people, they must have been bigger actors, but I think if you look through the IMDb, you probably wouldn't know as much from them before. But he's great in this because he wakes up with that sort of naivety. He's just kind of wandering about London, and he seems phased, but he doesn't seem terrified. He seems worried. He seems a bit astonished, but it's very dreamlike as well. Not just in the way it's shot, but his performance. He just sort of wanders about. He's picking up cans of delicious looking Pepsi that keep
I
getting
know
shown.
this film definitely is sponsored by
Yeah.
Pepsi, isn't it?
And he's just sort of wandering about in that hospital gown, and he's got his wee plastic bag and that, and he's wandering about kind of areas we all recognise, and it's just something very grounded, but dreamlike about his performance, especially at the start. And as it goes on, I think it's good to know as well that watching the film, not to get any spoilers for later on, but people can say it's quite jarring how the character evolves quite quickly. But we don't know what this guy is like beforehand.
Yeah, we
That's the
get no
thing.
sense of who he was prior to obviously this sort of apocalyptic situation. And actually, what I think is quite interesting about his character is how quickly he picks up the sort of rules of the game, as it were. There's obviously a sort of new world order, and there are certain ways in order to survive, and he picks that up quite quickly, which, as you say, almost alludes to who he was before, but we just don't have that backstory to, this isn't inspiring Hollywood to write a pre 28. This isn't 28 days prior that we're pitching at this particular moment in time, but it is interesting because he does seem to adapt really quickly.
Yeah, and it just kind of wonders about, like I say, that kind of dreamlike kind of sense, and there is something quite visually striking about Cillian Murphy as well. And how thin he is in this movie. Yeah, his eyes, but he's also been in this coma for 28 days, so he looks really gaunt and really thin, and it's just difficult not to keep your eyes. It's difficult to take your eyes off him, and as you say, he's got his very striking, piercing eyes as well. Wondering about London, and even just the way he walks in that, he's not just walking about. There's something quite childlike, almost. It's like watching Frankenstein taking his first steps.
Yeah, it's very, he's obviously been in a coma, so like his body is also just like getting used to walking and using all its functions again, and you definitely get that sense of him really, really quickly. We also, as I mentioned, the cast includes likes of Naomi Harris, Brendan Gleeson, and Christopher Eccleston. What did you think of their performances and how they drive the sort of drama and emotion throughout the film? I feel like Brendan Gleeson is involved in one of the most iconic scenes in the film in particular, but what did you think of them as a sort of support? I'm calling it a supporting cast. I feel like they all have their moments, but yeah, we'll call them supporting cast for now.
Yeah, ensemble cast maybe.
Yeah, actually that's probably fair. Yeah.
I thought the cast really kind of rounded it up really nicely, especially Christopher Eccleston. I'm sure we'll get to later. But funny enough, watching that film at the time, even kind of looking back at it, he was probably the most recognisable actor in that
Well, was he
movie.
not Doctor Who at the time?
No,
When was
no,
he
no, no,
Doctor
no.
Who?
That was 2005, 2004,
Oh, right, okay, so
2005.
oh,
So
right, okay, so yeah. Well,
but
it's
he
a couple
had
of years
been
before, yeah.
in Our Friends in the North. I'm sure he
Yeah,
was in that.
he was,
So
and
he
he
still
didn't let
put
him have it as well. So he like two kind of TV things, yeah.
But Naomi Harris is great because it's good when you get her character right off the bat because she's the hardened warrior and she's just very cold and very like I will kill you in a heartbeat, which obviously becomes a very motif of the film. But she is sort of there to kind of like get us up to speed. She's an exposition vehicle in many ways as well, but it never feels forced.
Yeah, completely agree. John?
Yeah, you're right, because there's a certain amount of exposition that has to be put across in these type of films. You need to know the ground rules, the world, if you like, and by having her character do that in the space, I mean, she does it in maybe like 2 or 3 minutes. It's not drawn out in any way, and it's not almost like a video game where you're learning as you go along. You learn what the rules are and things like that. It's not like that. This is more like real life, I suppose, in a way. And you have to know what you're doing right away because otherwise it is basically life and death. So yeah, I did like her character and the way that she changed throughout the story. But having said that, she was probably like that before things went south, and its circumstances have kind of forced her into the sort of situations in. But I like the fact that both her and the other guy, whose name I cannot remember, when the Cillian Murphy Jim meets up with him, he has a whole backstory that he tells, whereas she doesn't really. She kind of holds back a wee bit on it. So I like that, but I like the inclusion of these wee things about, you know, people like before they were actually subject to the infected and everything. The Brendan Gleeson character, for instance, he's very like that. He has a whole story behind him, but everything that the film focuses on is the fact that he's just trying to protect his daughter. That's what it's all about for him. That's his whole reason for going on at the moment. So, and you kind of get the idea that if it was just him and his own, he wouldn't actually be in the film because he would have killed himself by now. He wouldn't have tried to survive because he had nothing to actually live for, which I found particularly interesting. But yes, excellent cast. I think with Christopher Eccleston, he was obviously in Shallow Grave, so he'd worked with Daniel Boyle before.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so, but yes, he was still up and coming at the time. He wasn't like a full sort of named actor. And like say by 2002, he was doing various TV things and sort of smaller roles, smaller film roles, but it wasn't quite up at that level. But yeah, I think you're right in saying it was a pretty unknown cast, if you like. And I think that helps in a way because, as we keep saying, when you watch films, especially like foreign language films and stuff like that, and you're not aware of the status of certain actors that are in them, then the stakes are higher because you don't know who's going to live, who's going to die. And
yeah, who's the big name that's going to make it to the end? Is it where there isn't one in this case?
Exactly, yeah. So it increases the stakes for everybody that's actually involved in the film, watching it or being in it as well. So yeah, and I always like that. So, and it's less and less of a surprise these days because, let's face it, we watch hundreds of films, so you kind of get an idea who's going to make it to the third act and who's not. So yeah.
I do think the performances reflect the sort of psychological toll of surviving. Like we talk about the characters getting harder and more sort of resilient. And I think that definitely all of them capture this. And I think the Christopher Eccleston character in particular is interesting because he is obviously the character that you want to think of yourself in an apocalyptic situation where you're like the resourceful, helpful one who's going to help, you know, the child escape or the family escape or whatever, or you're going to come up with the plan. But actually, could you be the villain that's just determined to survive at all costs? And so I like the fact that his character reflects, I guess, how different people react to that type of situation. I know for a fact, obviously, I'd be one of the first to die because I'd probably not have my glasses and I don't want to eat cold food out of a tin. But I'm okay with that. I've made my peace with that. But I like the fact that we are thrown into this world where, as we say, we don't know who these characters were necessarily before, but actually we get to understand how they're reacting to the situation that they find themselves in presently. And not everyone's going to be a saint in terms of, you know, surviving, as you say. Even Brendan Gleeson's character to an extent might not have lived for himself had he not had his daughter. So I think Danny Boyle does a good job of sort of bringing us into that world where, as you say, we don't know who's who in terms of good guy, bad guy, and who's going to survive. But one of the other things that Danny Boyle does really well in this film is obviously using silence and empty spaces. Obviously, that really iconic scene where Cillian Murphy walks through deserted London streets. How does that contribute to the sense of dread that you get when you watch this film? Because I feel like it's immediate that when you start watching, you're like, this is wrong, and this is not although it's dreamlike, you're like, this is not a dream sequence, because there's something that feels inherently bad here. So how do you think that sort of silence and space kind of plays into that?
I suppose in many ways, kind of looking at London, that deserted, and knowing it's not digital effects, knowing they've actually managed to block this off from a production point of view and seeing it in the film, it gives it, I don't know if uncanny valley is the best way to describe it.
No, I
but
think
it
you're
does-
right. I think, yeah.
There's something familiar but unsettling about it. And the fact, I mean, they haven't just picked a random site. They've not like picked like Manchester or Edinburgh or anything like that. They've picked London, one of the most busiest cities on the planet, especially the UK. You know, it's just so, to see it so deserted and think, oh my God, what's happened here? And knowing how low budget this film is as well. So you're thinking, I remember for years thinking, they must have done some sort of digital edit, they must have. Then you find out how they made the film, the production, you go, that's actually even more incredible. But at the same time, when you see that, because I mean, let's be honest, this film for the most part does look like a student film in terms of
Yeah.
the aesthetic of it. You know, it looks really bad, but I know that's the point. To see everything so blocked off, it's not this big, shiny, big budget, well lit movie, and you see London like that. It's like somebody's filmed it with a camcorder, and they've caught London like that. And that really, as you said, made it adds to that dread because it's really unfamiliar to see London like that. And you're like, oh, what's happened here? Even if you've seen the trailer, seen the film a million times, whatever, you're still watching it going, why is he the only person walking about? Where is everybody? And then it does find people.
Yeah. I think, though, if you'd watched this film before 2020, it would have more of an impact because, let's face it, we've all seen the images of the initial lockdown where you saw the likes of London and there was nobody about at all. And and a lot of people compared it to 28 Days Later in that. And obviously it had an effect that Mary actually watched the film as well. So. But yes, it does have that sort of, it's strange, isn't it? It's very, very weird the way that they pulled that together and getting it so quiet. Like I say, doing it naturally rather than using like lots of effects and stuff, and being able to get that sort of eeriness. That's what it comes down to. It's eerie because you're so used to these. Well, I mean, let's face it, like London's like a mega city now, isn't it? It's so big. It's 24 hours. There's never any time when it's quiet. And to have it like that and to have like rubbish strewn across the streets and everything, some of the most sort of the biggest landmarks that you know of, and they're just completely dead and silent, and it's just it's eerie. It really is visually striking, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like the camera work does really contribute to that because there's a sort of rawness to it as well. Like I'm not saying it feels like a found footage, but there is a kind of element of that, I feel, in the initial stages where you're just like, this does look like something that if they'd opened up some sort of like time capsule of what had happened, like it's got that kind of vibe to it of somebody just kind of following you around like on a phone or like an old fashioned like camcorder and actually capturing this moment. Do you feel that the camera work sort of, or the style sort of continues throughout, and how do you feel that contributes to the overall sense of kind of dread and eeriness that Danny Boyle is trying to convey?
Well, you mentioned that being a kind of found footage type thing, but it does have that home movie vibe to it. You know, it's got the shaky cam. It's got really, it's shot very interesting. There's a lot of really wide shots, especially in that opening, to just show you how small Jim is walking about these empty streets. And the thing is about the film as well, the way it's shot, and I don't like the term elevated horror.
No. Are you going to use it though?
I don't like that. No, the reason I think if any film was going to be called elevated horror, you would call this, and people probably wouldn't. That's the thing, they wouldn't retroactively call it that. But I'd have no problem calling a studio film elevated horror because it's slightly artistic. It's artistically done compared to, no offense to like Colonel the Cornfield, for example. which is what it is. But this is very art house horror, I would say.
I would agree.
There
Yeah.
is something very surreal and maybe you can answer this one better maybe than me, but German expressionist about it at times with some of the shots and the colouring, especially in the house at the end.
Yeah, there's an extreme use of light and shadow. Even just that first scene where they're hiding in the, like, it looks like what used to be like a convenience shop, and it's got all the glass, like through the you can see like the light sort of coming from the fridge slightly where the cans of Pepsi are, but the way they're shot through the glass, and it's like extreme. It's almost like an old-fashioned noir, the way the bars of shadow are going across their face, for sure.
And that's the thing about the film. So it's got this very amateurish look to it, but it's done by design to the point that this is a film that the lighting for a lot of it looks terrible, but it's so well lit. You catch scenes like that, you think they haven't just flung some cameras up to try and get some shots here. They've really took a lot of time and effort with this film and had to do it with a limited time. So it makes it even more incredible the artistry in making this film. They've managed to make a film with so much thought in it look rough to the point they've gave people the impression, oh, you could go and do this, and then it spawns a billion student films because people have access to these cameras. They're not that inexpensive. Well, even at the time, though, compared to a film camera, they're quite inexpensive. Still dear. And people were getting them thinking, I can make a film. And you saw these kind of knockoffs, not in terms of plot, but in terms of style, popping up everywhere. And they're like, yeah, man, you're not Danny Boyle. You can't just pull that off. Because, in my opinion, he's one of the greatest filmmakers ever. The guy jumps from genre to genre like it's nothing and just gets hit after hit for the most part. And in this film, everything is done by design stylistically. You get some films, even like Jaws, for example, where some things that they kind of work in the fly because this didn't work and accidents come from it. With this, everything seems so deliberate, but I also think it had to be because of how restrained they were in doing it. And not to jump to the end of the film, but have you noticed how at the end of the film, how much different the quality is to the rest of it? The quality is different. The camera shots are different. For lack of a better term, it looks like a film. And it is shot in film at the end, they change the cameras, but it looks more like you expect. The tracking shots, the way that it's blocked off, it looks more like you expect. It's more familiar. But that first hour, 40 minutes, it's ugly. I wouldn't even go say it's hard to see at times because it is really well lit. It's just like nothing else we've really seen for a mainstream release.
Yeah, it changes when they come out of the city, don't they? That's when it goes from the sort of, is it digital video they were using? Is it DV cameras?
No, it's digital all the way up until after I don't want to spoil anything. I know the film's 23 years old, but
I think you're all
after
right,
they leave, okay then, so after Jim gets shot and he blacks out and he wakes back up and on the farmhouse, that's when it changes, and it's almost like there's a difference in safety then as well, because they are much safer there. Up until that point, they haven't been, and it has, but that's it. It's just saying I found footage of that home movie vibe to it, but the camera's almost like a character in this as well, because it's really given us an insight to how manic, and it's a really fast-paced film. You've only really got that one like lull where they go shopping and things seem a bit kind of relaxed, and you think this is okay. But leaving the city, as you mentioned there, John, and things seem to be getting better, but then it actually goes even worse when they meet Christopher Eccleston because they're never away from danger.
Yeah, even in the lull, I expected something to happen though, because
I was the same.
that's the kind of standard horror thing, isn't it? When they kind of like take it easy for a wee bit, you think, no, something's going to go on here, but obviously it didn't work out that way, which is obviously to the benefit of the film, I think. Yeah,
it's not a jump. Well, there are some jumps, but I feel like it's not a jump scare type of film, which we can get onto when we talk about 28 Weeks later, because obviously that's a very different type of film. One of the big things that stands out, obviously, is the score and the sound design. So you've got John Murphy's score, the piece of music in the house in a heartbeat, which I think has become like a really iconic piece of cinema scoring. But you've also got the sound design, which I feel sort of distinguishes the infected from maybe traditional movie zombies in terms of the way they sort of communicate, I suppose you would call it, like the noises that they make, the way they comport themselves. How did the score and the sound design then sort of impact your viewing of this? Because obviously I feel like that piece of music has been used loads and loads and loads, and in some cases it can mean that maybe the impact diminishes, but I definitely don't think it does, even though I watched this like way later than it came out. But what did you think of those elements of the film?
It's
I mean,
dirty,
the
isn't
sound
it? The way the
design.
sound, On you go,
Yeah.
Thomas.
No, it's on you go. I was going to say it's harsh, but dirty's a better word for it.
Yeah,
Dirty.
yeah, but not in an erotic way. Yeah, it's dirty. Yeah, but
Everything you say is erotic, don't you worry.
oh yeah. Okay, I've just changed the bumper for the start of the podcast. Great. No, it has to be sort of dirty and squelchy and everything, because let's face it, when you see the infected, there's nothing clean and nice about them at all. And I'm sure we'll discuss the actual the look of them in a short while. But yes, the sound is really, really important, and that has to reflect what you're seeing on screen, and this definitely does. There's nothing pleasant about it, and it doesn't need to be anything pleasant about it at all. So yeah, it is really kind of you don't really get used to it at any time. And they do certain things. If it's just one of them, they focus more on the sort of slabbery nature of what they're doing, because obviously they're trying to bite you, and there's obviously blood and all sorts of stuff flying about. So they focus on that. But when it's more of them, when it's a mob, you're just hearing the screams more than anything else. And it's quite haunting in a way, which is not great. And it's something that they come back to time and time again. We'll mention it when we talk about the next film as well, about the use of the sound as well. But yes, it's impressive, and it fits in really nicely with the soundtrack, because you've got to remember this is like 2002, so the music they're using in it is from that sort of period. So you're talking about sort of dancey house, sort of driving, sort of pulsing beats and things like that. And because it's such, like Thomas says, it's such a propulsive film, there's always something going on. It kind of really fits in with that really nicely. So yes, very impressive indeed. And obviously a lot of thought put into it, the same as every other aspect of the film.
Yeah, it's just harsh, very harsh, and it's jarring. And as John was alluding to as well, it never lets you just sit back. Whenever there's always something happening, and you get those lulls, as John said, you're expecting horror film tropes, that you're expecting jump scare, you're expecting something to go wrong. But when things do go wrong, it doesn't let up. And even the bit when Jim's out of the church at the beginning of the film, and he's infected for the first time, and they stand up and just stare at him and they're frozen. That's one of the most terrifying bits in the film for me. Actually, especially watching it back, knowing how the infected react, knowing that they're fast, knowing that they're savage and they're vicious. Watching that scene back, knowing what happens, and they're just frozen. It's like, why aren't they moving? This is really horrible. This comes out and he's clearly injured, so he's walking really strangely and kind of jerking and twitching. And again, the sounds he's making, it's not your typical zombie style noises of like Night of the Living Dead. That's great. I'm not meaning that derogatory towards that, but they don't sound like they're dying. Not in the same way. They don't sound like the death rattle of a decay. There's too much of a frenetic energy still pulsing through them. And the gurgling and the gargling and the spitting and it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible.
Yeah, I think we talk about the film having a propulsive nature. The infected certainly do as well, and I think that the way the film sort of depicts their violence, I suppose you would call it, is really different to other sort of zombie or horror films, that we'd had up until that point. And you talked about the look of the infected as well, and I think I like the fact that in a way that there isn't an explanation as such as to, yes, we do get the sort of the monkeys in the cages and they've infected them with rage, but like rage is such an abstract concept to be infected by, and I feel like that really sort of fuels the depiction of the infected as well. So I mean, you talked about the look of them and the violence. Like, how different do you feel this was watching? Like, obviously you guys went to see it at the time. How different do you feel it was actually seeing not a zombie mass, but this, as I say, this infection of rage? Was it really striking to see something like that at the time?
Yeah, because up until that point, I mean, I mentioned earlier on that Danny Boyle specifically doesn't call them zombies, and it's that kind of debate if they're zombies or not. And for all intents and purposes, I suppose they are. they bite you like that, you get infected, you become that undead style person. But up until that point, the typical zombies were slow. That's the thing. And you kind of think to yourself, after a zombie apocalypse, I could probably run away. It's like
To be clear, I
you
have never
can run for
thought
these things.
that.
But this, and you've got an enemy, this undead, vicious, unreasoning, just visceral, primal rage running towards you. Your savagery. Yeah, I don't really remember having seen anything like that in films before. I don't know if you had, John. And I must say, this was the first film to ever do it. It did influence the Dawn of the Dead remake quite heavily, which had the zombies running. And they were more likely infected from this than they were the zombies of the original Romero film. That's actually a great film, in my opinion. I love the Dawn of the Dead remake. Yeah, I hadn't seen anything like this because you're used to kind of zombies being slower and that sort of thing. Or if even vampires, for example, they're charismatic, they can charm you in films, but for this, you just had this brain dead horde you couldn't reason with, and they weren't going to stop until you were like them or dead.
No, you're right. I hadn't really seen anything like it before. And it's obviously coined the term fast zombies since then. A lot of films that you talk about, and you talk about slow zombies and fast zombies. It just wasn't a thing. Like say, Mary, you could probably outpace them with a brisk walk, but not with these guys. So yes, it was. It's actually, if you think about it, it's a sort of a no-brainer. If you want to do something different, you make them run. But nobody actually really thought about that in film terms before that, really. So it was kind of, I wouldn't say genius-like, but it was very clever the way they did it. Obviously, it all comes from Alex Garland, which it shouldn't really be a surprise in that sort of respect, should it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I also think that what's really important is the film's shift of, I suppose you would call it like an external threat, which is like the concept of rage, to a very human threat, which is the soldiers, which as a viewer makes me feel rage watching their behavior. Like, how did you feel you get sucked into that particular storyline, I guess? Because that is about rage as well, but a very different kind of rage, one that perhaps feels more tangible, I guess.
It's not just that as well. It's like it also goes back to that jarring element of the film, because when you first watch this and you think, okay, what, this film's took a turn. This has went from being about infected, and you think that's what it's going to be about. Then they change villain halfway through the film and turn it into something else completely. And as a man, I found this line frightening. As a woman, Mary, I can't even imagine how frightening it is when Christopher Eccleston just casually says to Jim, "I promised a woman."
I honestly did, for the first time I watched this, I actually gasped. I was so shocked. I did not see that coming. Because again, in these situations, you're sort of, the narrative has always been that the army is there to help. Like, there is no way that I saw that particular turn coming. And I guess because by the time I'd watched it, Christopher Eccleston had been Doctor Who as well. So I just thought of him as like a good guy and did not see that particular twist coming. So I found that very, very frightening. And also, again, a very credible threat. Like, if you're going to continue on with society or whatever you want to call it, then you obviously need procreation, and you need women in order to do that. And the fact that they lured that off, it gives me chills even talking about it. It's awful.
But I mean, unraveling that part as well, it's like this was their decision after less than a month.
Yeah,
they resorted to this.
Yeah, and that's what I mean about, like, you think in these situations that you would be like the heroic character, because we all like to think of ourselves as inherently good, but as you've said, in less than a month, these people have become the villains in their own story of what's going on. And I think that's what makes this film so effective, is that Danny Boyle doesn't just show you good guys who are trying to survive. He's shown you every sort of element of human nature, and that in itself makes you feel angry when you're watching it, I guess.
Almost like rage. It makes you feel rage.
Yes. But I think it's definitely, it's one of the more interesting elements of the film, is that shift, because there is a distinct shift in tone and style and everything else to go along with that realization of who that particular group of soldiers are.
It does. And you talk about the kind of the rage from the soldiers. You compare that to the rage from the zombies, and there's something pure, and then, or the infected, even, there's something pure in their emotion. It's just to destroy. But with the soldiers, it's more evil than that because there's a conscious thought there to we're going to rape these women. One of them is a little girl because we can't live in a world where it's just us. We still need to be guys and do what we're doing, and it's horrible. And there's so much to unpack from that. And in fact, if this film came out now, the conversations around it would be very different. I don't think people wanted to have those conversations at the time. They just wanted to see fast zombies. And when that film turned like that, nobody's expecting it, and it becomes something totally different. Yeah, people weren't ready for that, and I think it definitely adds to the film, definitely does, but in a way that rightfully makes people feel uncomfortable. But in a way they weren't ready for those conversations. They just wanted to see fast zombies, and that's fair enough to an extent, because that's what the film was about on paper. Not that I thought they tricked anybody or anything. It was just a hell of a bold swing they went and took from the screenwriting to how they presented it. And they pulled it off, in my opinion. They nailed it, absolutely nailed it. And yeah, it just has an extra layer of frightening to the film, as you say, Mary. In the apocalypse, you expect somebody to come and save you. The army's always the good guys. They're the ones that have got their shit together. And the second one, they even try to still portray that. But in this, it's like, yeah, you've just been rescued by the wrong group of people. Things have went from bad to worse.
Yeah, it's a
Wrong group of men.
premeditated nature, isn't it?
I was going to throw that out. They're not people, men.
Yeah. Like you say, it's the premeditated nature of it, the fact that they put a signal to draw people in, especially women, because they reckon that probably half of the people that will turn up will be women. So yeah, it's very creepy.
Did anybody else notice that? I mean, we're talking spoilers here. If you've not seen the film, please turn the podcast off, go and watch it, or skip the next couple of minutes. As your warning. When Brendan Gleeson gets infected, they were watching that the whole time.
Yeah.
They were waiting, and they waited, and then they made their move. But they were they were assessing that entire situation that whole time. And the more you think about it, the more frightening it really is. It's horrible. I can't remember your initial question now, Mary. But
oh no, it was just about reflecting the sort of shift, and as I say, there's the sort of abstract threat of rage in its purest form to the very credible threat of what these soldiers are plotting. But I think it all sort of feeds into so I was looking at the sort of the themes of the film, and people have said it's an allegory for post 9/11 anxiety. They've talked about sort of civilization versus savagery. They've talked about rage as a concept, as a metaphor rather for sort of human nature. And I think all of this sort of everything that we've talked about there sort of feeds into that. The post 9/11 thing I think was quite interesting because it was talking about sort of uncontrollable threats or unseen threats. It's obviously not something that occurred to me while I was watching it, but I guess again, if you'd watched it at the time, it probably would have maybe seemed a bit more obvious. But I definitely think this is a film that is it feeds on your anxieties and it makes you feel anxious watching it, and part of that is this notion of you hope that you would be the hero, but that's not necessarily true. Have you come across that before about the sort of the 9/11 allegory or the sort of collapse of society or unseen threats? Have any of you heard of that before, or have I just read something absolutely wild?
The 9/11 thing was by accident because the film was sort of heavily into production at the time when that
that's happened. What I was thinking. It must have been too far along for it to have been a deliberate
but the whole thing about world unrest and everything and things really going to shit have obviously been about for a long time, and they drew on that, especially with the initial news footage that they showed at the very start of the film. It was all to do with the fact that there's so much disturbance and problems in the world and everything to do with that. So 9/11 was obviously an extension of that. So that was something, it was just the timing of it brought it to the fore, and people talked about it in those sort of terms because a lot of people don't think about how long it takes to make a film. It takes 2 years to sort of go from start to finish, even if you've got a script. So yes, you're talking about sort of not fortuitous timing. That would be as if they'd kind of planned it around that whole thing. But yes, it was part of the narrative at the time. Definitely was.
So obviously the film has one of the most sort of iconic sort of opening sequences with the walking through London. How did you feel the ending of the film sort of do you feel like it was sort of wrapped neatly in a bow? Were you anticipating there was going to be any sequels? How do you feel that rounded things off?
I think I was always waiting for a sequel. Quite.
It's just because you love a sequel.
I love a sequel, yeah. I'm looking forward to 28, 100 years later. But with this, I mean, there's an alternate scene. There's an alternate ending where Jim dies, and they filmed it, and it's not as good. I prefer this end. I like the happy ending, or the happy ending you can get from it. Again, that also jars from the rest of the film, but I want these characters to live. That's the thing. I want them to survive. And after Jim's his rage at the film, when he just goes on the rampage, you're like, yeah, I want these guys to get out, and you think they're not gonna. And then it has that kind of again, almost tackled in 28 days later again, and they seem to be living quite nicely. Again, that's when the film shoots the film, and everything changes, and it just seems a lot more. It's easy to watch at that point, and you do feel more at ease. And you see the plane flying across and that, and you think, you know what, maybe they're going to be rescued. And you think, you know what, it's not wrapped up in a nice little bow because we don't know what happens. But it gives you hope, which the film does not give you at all. And, I can imagine a lot of people maybe thinking it's a cop-out because the film isn't like that. But I liked that. I liked the fact that the film gave us a happier ending because these guys did deserve it. And we don't always need to have bleakness just because it's artistically well done. The difference just between Speak No Evil, the original and the remake. I loved the ending of the remake. I loved the ending of the original. I think both work in their own context. But this, I really liked the fact that it was a warm ending where you kind of give them that hope. Again, the right shot as well, where Jim's kind of out in a conscious dreaming, and you see hell written on the grass. And you think, what the hell is going on? And then you realise it's supposed to be help. Or also hello. And I like the fact that the film had a bit of a hope to it because there is none of that the entire way through. And again, it's nicely jarred. But no, there is hope. There is hope when you meet Brendan Gleeson in that. And it is difficult not to get caught up in it, but you're constantly thinking something bad's going to happen, something bad's going to happen, something bad will happen. So this time you're thinking, oh, that's actually quite nice because it's not a nice little bow. It's not schmaltzy. It just, all using the word there, but it just gives you that hope again. And you think maybe they'll have a sequel and we'll find out what happens. But yeah, I liked the ending.
It's very open, wasn't it? It was open at the end. It meant that you could take it as a standalone film or it could lead into a sequel or whatever. But was I the only one that thought maybe the plane, when it was flying over, was actually going to drop something and blow them up? Was that just me?
Because I just always wonder, is it going to be good or bad guys? Because obviously your experience with the military in this film is not a positive one. So you're just like, okay, they're waving, but actually is this going to be more of the same? Like in terms of, we'll pick you up, but only if you help us repopulate there sort of thing.
Yeah. But I thought the ending was appropriate. And like Tommy says, there's a few alternates actually on the DVD extras as well, which were very interesting to watch. There was a couple of different ones, wasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, Mary, do you know there's a whole second half of the film that was different?
No, I've got them both on DVD, but I didn't watch any of the extras. I just watched the films. I'll need to go back and have a look at that, actually.
They don't shoot it, but it's storyboarded, and it's worth looking at. It's a totally different film.
Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm. It pivots at the point where Brendan Gleeson gets infected as well.
Right. Okay, no, I'll definitely watch that. That sounds really, really interesting. I was just so focused on actually watching the films themselves that it didn't occur to me to go and watch those, but I definitely will, especially as it gives a really different film. Again, it's kind of what we were talking about, if a different director had got their hands on it, etc. So it kind of fits into all of that. So I assume both of you would recommend this film and would encourage people to go and see it. But even though that you don't necessarily have to do your homework before 28 years later comes out, but I would assume you would encourage people to give this a watch or a rewatch.
Oh, 100%.
Definitely. Yeah. I think you do need to watch it before probably watching 28 years later, because you need a wee bit of background.
I suppose you do, yeah.
Yeah. And especially since there is going to be a trilogy of films. Mm-hmm. So it's not, there will be callbacks, I would imagine, to some elements of the film. This one and the next one that we're going to talk about as well. I'd imagine there would be something in there that Won't be vital, but it'll be.
Direct, maybe.
Yes, yeah, I think so. Well, I think they may be returning characters as well. I'm not 100% sure, but I think.
Are we all thinking Cillian Murphy's the corpse in the grass?
No,
They've said
but
it isn't.
yeah,
I know,
they've
I'm
said
only
it's
joking.
not.
It's just because everyone said that was him, and I thought if
Yeah.
I was Cillian Murphy, I'd be bloody raging. It's like a grey corpse with a string of hair, and they're like, "Oh, that's
Well,
Cillian
maybe
Murphy for sure."
Well, maybe that's Danny Boyle's point. He's like, I want Cillian Murphy to rageful again. The film's about rage. The whole thing's about rage. It's just about rage.
Yeah.
Make you raging. The film's gonna be terrible. Just want you raging.
He has actually been listed as an actor in the second film of the 28 Years trilogy. Whether that's actually a bit of misdirection, I don't know. But he has actually been listed in that as well. So, because obviously there was all the speculation about him being one of the infected at that point, which doesn't make sense because the infected die, if you think about it in this film. Or is it the next one they talk about the infected dying?
Yeah, they do. Which does obviously bring us nicely on to the film sequel, which is 28 Weeks Later. This film came out in 2007 and was written by Rowan Joff, Jesus Olmo, Enrique Lopez Levine, and Juan Carlos Fresnadillo, who also directed the film. It is set just over 6 months after the first film, and we have an entirely new cast here, including Jeremy Renner, Robert Carlyle, Catherine McCormick, which is a nice throwback to our 1995 episode, Rose Byrne, Idris Elba, Imogen Poots, and the wonderfully named Macintosh Muggleton. So we are plunged into post-pandemic London, where US-led NATO forces have been tasked with killing off the virus and making plans for repopulation. But needless to say, all does not go to plan. So again, did you guys see this in the cinema? What were your impressions? Did it hold up to 28 Days Later? Because I feel like these have come out like quite close together, whereas we've got a big gap before the third one comes out. What were your thoughts going into this sequel?
I didn't see this in the cinema. I do remember that. I thought the opening of this movie is one of the greatest things I've seen. It was terrifying. It was so well done. And then the rest of the film just bombed hard. Very quickly.
Okay. Yeah.
It just came off the rails really early on. It didn't get any better. And I watched it again a couple of years ago for the first rewatch, thinking maybe I'll give it another chance. And I'm watching it, and I'm watching the opening going, oh my God, I forgot how good this was. This is amazing, blah, blah. This film isn't as bad. Here we go. And then it just went the exact same way. And then because I watched the first one, I rewatched it again another week. Exact same. I've given this film a few chances now. I just don't like it. I don't think it's a good movie. I only found out this year that Danny Boyle directed the opening, and that explains a lot.
Ah, right. Okay,
yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. Okay.
I don't like this film. I don't care about the characters. I hate the stupid children in it. They make a lot of illogical choices.
I'm ripping up my question sheet right now.
There's a lot. I mean, I love a good illogical decision in horror films, but the choices in this were baffling. There was no consistency throughout the film in terms of things like the infected, for example. They're these rage-filled zombies that are just trying to kill people, as we spoke about with the last film in detail. And this, it depends who they are. I mean, if you're Robert Carlyle, you're a bit more nuanced, a bit more of a stalker. You have a bit more control over you.
Is we had fast zombies, now we've got nuanced.
Yeah, and I just don't like this film. There's no dread in it. There's no sense of tension. I don't care about the characters. And it's just flat. It's not. There's nothing for me. Nothing at all. Apart from the opening. You talk about fair enough in a heartbeat being overused. They overuse it in this movie.
They do.
So in the first one, I never really touched on the fact it's got in a heartbeat because Neil Mahanis's character is like, I will kill you in a heartbeat. And then when push comes to the shove, she can't because she loves him. In this, they use it 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
3 times. At the beginning, and don't get me wrong, it's great. And you could say, well, that makes sense because, no, Jim, was Robert Carlyle's name in it again? Don. He leaves his wife in a heartbeat because he's like, I've got a choice, that way. The music's great, and it seems to be throwback to the previous film. They then do it again halfway through, and it's not impactful. They then do it again at the end, and by that point, I'm like, I don't want to hear this anymore. It's not adding to the scene. You just keep reusing this score, and it's not doing anything for anybody. I don't like it.
John, do you feel as
It's all
strongly as Simi about this particular sequel?
I'm afraid I do, yeah. I had never watched it until we watched it for this. I don't know why. I don't know why I missed it at the time, but I'd probably read some reviews of it more than anything else. I had a certain amount of anticipation about it because obviously reviews can be wrong. We've all been there. We've read about stuff and we've kind of thought, well, I'll have my own take on this, and it turns out to be different. But very much like Thomas, and I watched the start of it and thought, oh, here we go, yeah, good start. Yeah, it's very reminiscent. It takes elements from the first film. For obvious, I didn't realize it was actually Danny Boyle that directed the opening of it, but now that you've said that, it makes perfect sense because the rest of the film is nothing like that. It changes tone very, very quickly because I'd written down like my notes on it saying it sort of emulates the look and the feel of the first film in the first 5 minutes, and it draws you in. You go, this is going to be good. This is, yeah, good start, nice and strong, and then, like you say, falls off a cliff, unfortunately. So yeah, it's just very disappointing, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, no, I definitely felt the same. I also think it's just cast is slightly more sort of well-known, I guess, and slightly more fleshed out in terms of there's more characters to it. But I thought the opening sequence, my heart was in my mouth. I was like, oh my God, this is so awful. And then, of course, you've got Catherine McCormick's character sort of banging on the window and Bobby Carlyle tanking it out of there. And you're like, oh my God, again, this brings up this theme of like, you would love to be the hero, but actually you're saving yourself. And I was really drawn into it. And then it became like a really bad like video game sort of like shootout type of thing, or there was loads of random jump scares that I didn't like, and I just thought this is a very different film to the first one in a bad way, obviously, and you can see that it's somebody else's fingerprints that are all over it, and actually that reassures me that for 28 years later, where we're getting Danny Boyle back, like this is a big deal, because actually this film just doesn't live up to the expectations that I obviously had, having watched 28 Days Later just like a few weeks prior. I know that we're just going to probably rip this to shreds, but I thought it was worthwhile talking about sort of like characterization and obviously, the themes and the violence throughout this as well. Robert Carlyle obviously is trying to be like the good guy. He's the father. He's got all these responsibilities within the block that he lives in. He's got all this extra access, which they make a point of telling you 16 million times. Just in case you didn't get it, he has access to everywhere in the building. But what did you think of his performance in the film? Because maybe he's trying to do something different with the infected. I did quite like the scene where he becomes infected from his wife. I thought that was somewhat sort of watchable and kind of touching and had all these sort of emotional elements to it. What did you think of him in this film? Because he obviously is kind of the main driver of it.
He's great. I mean, the performances are fine in this film. You mentioned about the kind of the bigger cast, but even at that, Jeremy Renner wasn't very well known at this point. I think the Hurt Locker was still to come.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I could be wrong.
I think you're right. I think I'm imposing sort of retrospective perspectives of these people onto a film that came out. Yeah.
Because even Idris Elba, I mean, like, it was in The Wire, but other than that, I mean, yeah, you're right. But you look at this cast, it's a really good cast. Robert Carlyle, to be fair, though, was pretty well known, so I think the cast is still better known overall. But he's great in the film. I don't know what his character was meant to be, though, because at the beginning of the film, you see him abandon his wife, and that doesn't really have any other point to it other than a plot point. And you're right, that scene with the reuniting is quite good, but it did need to abandon his wife for that for them to reunite with that and for that whole scene to happen. I don't think there was any emotional payoff from that. And also, I'll get on to the bit with his wife in a minute, but he's really good in it. I just don't know what he's meant to be doing, because is he a coward? Is he trying to do the right thing? Is he trying to be a dad? Is he trying to rebuild society? There's no clear arc for him. There's no clear motivation for him. He just seems to bounce about from scene to scene. And when we first see him, he's quite heroic, and then he gets really cowardly, and you're like, whoa, that's dark. But you see him fighting infected and stuff, and he seems like he's got a bit of an action hero type guy, and then he just runs away, and you're like, whoa, how's this going to play out? Doesn't really. There's a scene where he's talking to his kids, and you think, okay, this could have something to it. Then the film becomes about the kids, and I'm like, I don't care about them. These kids aren't interesting enough for me to focus on them. So it then pivots back to Robert Carlyle. Then he gets infected, and it's no longer about him. It's about the kids again. And I'm just like, why can't we focus on the things that are good in this film? Why do we keep bouncing about? There's too many characters that they keep trying to give equal time to. And it just always bounces back to the kids. The film's about them. I don't understand why it does that. It's a strange choice. And you get his wife. I mean, these films always have unanswerable questions. I get that. But why didn't Infected kill her? They couldn't infect her. They could have still killed her. But she seemed to fight her way out an army
Yeah, I get what you
of
mean. Yeah.
infected. She fought her way out an army of infected, then get back to her house. Just so happened to bump into her kids. It just so happened to take her back to the place where Robert Carlyle worked. There was a lot of very convenient things that happened to get to the plot. And they weren't subtle either. It was very kind of like obvious. And it was all that just happened just so the infection could kick back off. I don't know. I'm not a screenwriter. I'm not earning millions to make films, but he could have just had the infection still there
Yeah, I
outside the
think
walls.
it's obviously trying to do something different in terms of like there's the hint that Catherine McCormick's character is obviously like it's not even a hint, it's not subtle. That there's a suggestion that she's the cure because she can obviously have the virus in her blood and it's not turning her into anything. But of course, having her in the facility, no matter how secure it is, because Robert Carlyle has access to everywhere, obviously posed as a threat. John, what did you think of the sort of different characterization? Then obviously, as I say, you've got Robert Carlyle in the lead role. I definitely did not care for Tammy and Andy, the kids' characters. I would have loved to have seen more of Robert Carlyle. What did you feel about the sort of casting in general, and did it work for you? As Simi says, it's quite a big cast and it does sort of bounce around between a lot of different storylines.
I think a lot of them were kind of wasted because a lot of the characters were kind of like just cutouts of what you'd expect from these type of films. There was nothing original in the way that the characters in the first film were pretty original and believable more than anything else. The fact that, I mean, if you think about it, you're 28 weeks after this actually all kicked off, and yet security isn't tight enough to stop kids getting out in the first place. That, you know, and the fact that they would do that, and the fact that Robert Carlyle has been through such trauma, and yet he leaves enough doubt in their minds about what actually happened to their mother, so that they actually want to go and do something. And I know it's just plot reasons that it's all. I felt that they were kind of wasted in that, and I didn't think there was really very much outside of Robert Carlyle's performance in terms of character development. They tried a few things with like the Jeremy Renner character and the helicopter pilot who had the thing. It was Dad that he always touched and all this, and you're thinking, well, he's not going to last.
You're dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the standard. Yeah. You introduce something personal to outside of the core cast. Yep, they're not going to survive it. And that kind of screenwriting is very easy to do. It's very safe, and that's pretty much how I describe this film. It's kind of a safe sequel. It's not taking chances. It's just trying to. It's almost like a cash grab, I think, and it probably seems more like that given the fact that obviously Danny Boyle wasn't fully involved in it. I know he was in the build up to it, but not with actual full production. And you can tell that there's an awful lot going on here. There's 3 writers you mentioned, 3 or 4 writers.
There's 4, yeah.
Yeah, compared to 1 writer in the first film, so it's not a single vision. It's filmmaking by committee at that point, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like there are attempts to build tension in this film. I'm thinking specifically like the sniper sequence or the underground escape where you've got like the night vision like camera, but I don't feel it ever achieves the levels that obviously 28 Days Later does. Did you guys feel the same? Were there particular scenes that you liked or disliked in terms of trying to build sort of tension and scares, or how did you feel it worked?
You're right about the video game aspect, especially with the sniper scene. By that point, I was starting to kind of not care already that early on in the film. So at that scene, I wasn't really finding it tense because I didn't know who was getting shot and I didn't care. And then with the that you out.
I'm going.
And then with the underground scene, for example, where you've got the night vision and that, and that should have been a really tense scene, but by that point, I just didn't care. And it became clearly obvious to me these two kids were going to survive because that's what the whole film was about. Try to preserve the blood. Now, from a plot point of view, I get that. They're more important. They might be the cure. Make them interesting then. Make me
Yeah.
care about them.
I feel like
Make me want
I feel like
them to
they
live.
tried to. I feel like they did try to give these interesting elements, like for example, the fact that he had like the two different colored eyes because his mum had it, and obviously like, there was this notion that like her genes were so strong, and I feel like there was elements where they tried to infuse like a genuinely interesting story into it, and they just never really materialize, and instead they focused on what like these sort of bigger set pieces, like as I say, the sniper sequence in the underground, and it kind of just became a bit of a mess.
Well, exactly,
Yeah.
because even like even with the helicopter scene, where it's Harold Perrineau, his name is Romeo and Juliet, all is lost from them loads, but that scene when he killed all the zombies with a helicopter, and I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool, but this isn't the
Really?
sort
I
of
thought that was
film
shit.
No, I mean, but yeah, but in the context of the film it was in, it didn't work.
Right, okay.
But as a standalone set piece, I liked it. But by that point, I'm like, okay, is it now just a big dumb stupid action film? Because if it is, tell me that an hour ago. Don't try and do it now. The film was tonal all over the place. It didn't have an identity. First one does. This doesn't. As you're saying, John, filmmaking by committee. Everybody's trying to get their shit in, and make their mark on it. I don't know what this film was meant to be. A road movie. like, it was like, let's get these kids at the city. But these kids caused the thing. It was their fault. And
Yeah.
obviously because Robert Carlyle had all access area to everywhere in case you missed that part of the film. It's funny because I didn't even really realise that until you mentioned it. And I was like,
do you know what it is though? Because John and I have spoken about there's a reboot of Rebus, and like was it the cardboard boxes, John, in the first episode where they were like,
Yeah.
And all I can think of now is I'm not calling it exposition, I'm calling it cardboard boxes. So for me in this film, when Robert Carlyle kept swiping his card or telling his kids I've got access all area, I was like, oh, it's the cardboard boxes again. But yeah, I feel like that makes we had Pepsi in the first film, we've got Robert Carlyle's access all areas in the second film. It's just a bit sort of ubiquitous. John, tension for you, how did it work in this film? Do you think it worked at all? Actually, I mean, Sabi and I are sort of slating it here, but I don't know if you thought any sort of particular big set pieces worked for you or...
The sniper set piece worked for me, but the whole lead up to that did not work for me at all. In that, like, you've got the scene where Robert Carlyle, like you say, with full access, gets in to see his wife. Now, the whole logic behind all that is that obviously he can get in everywhere, but also they've got this asset that they've never found before, somebody who's infected, but still human. And they don't whisk her away to another more secure facility or anything. They just have her there, and they don't guard her as well. There's maybe a guard walking along the corridor that he can avoid by just waiting a couple of minutes till he goes past. And there was that, and then when he actually broke out, and they obviously with any sort of military setup, they've got these evacuation plans and emergency plans. But their emergency plan for everybody, for all the civilians, was to stick them in a car park underneath the facility. And you think, fair enough, right? Okay, they're putting them somewhere that's safe. But then Robert Carlyle bursts through some double doors at the other side, and you're thinking, so it wasn't very secure, was it? They hadn't really thought it out very well. And at that point, that's when the film, I mean, it was starting to go downhill quite early on, but at that point where he bursts through the door and it's just like this sort of standard horror character, starting to wreak vengeance, it is very like
growling.
Halloween. Yeah, and you're thinking, oh, are we in fuck off? This is just nonsense.
I'm sure that was exactly the vibe the writers were going for. Imagine them sitting down in the script
well
and be
done,
like,
yeah.
You can't watch this film on its own and go, don't compare it to the first one, because it's unfair, because it's a sequel. That's just going to happen. And you watch the first one and how different it is from this, even retrospective obviously, and then you kind of watch this one, how different it is to the first one, and you're saying, Judge, I have nothing wrong with standard horror fare. I don't.
Yeah.
I like that kind of film. I don't think that's what this film was, though. The film didn't even commit to that. It tried to have its cake and eat it, for lack of a better term. It wanted to go on and on about this atmospheric horror, same as the first one, but we also wanted to do these tropes. And you can do both. This film didn't know, because it didn't know what it wanted to be. And then you had like, Robert Carlyle's on, as you say, smash it. I like the scene actually when you didn't know who was infected, who wasn't. It reminded you of
Yeah, I
that
did
scene
like
in the
that as
first.
well. Yeah.
It reminded you of the exposition part of the first one. I think it was Mark, the character was, who was Vanilla Harris.
Mm.
He talks about losing his family, and he looks down and he couldn't tell who was infected and who wasn't. That scene reminded me of that, whether it was deliberate or not. And I like the idea that it said, you know what, this just shows you how quickly the infection can spread. And then next thing you know, London has fallen, you know, Sadiq Khan has failed again. But no, it's that sort of thing. It's like, yeah, it's like you see how quickly it just falls again and how things just kind of go to shit. But there wasn't much tension with it. There wasn't any dread. It's funny to talk about the reviews, John. I've been back on some of the reviews. A lot of them are more favourable than I remembered. And people
Really?
talk about the atmosphere. Yeah, and I remember a lot of people saying that it was atmospheric, and I thought, I did not get that at all. I didn't think that the film struggled to get its identity. Even the scene with Jeremy Renner, where he's pushing the car and the guys with the flamethrowers and stuff, just didn't care.
Well, you didn't care for Jenny Renner's personal sacrifice to get those kids out of there.
No, because it was just so schmaltzy.
just a hard no. I mean, I do think the one scene in the film that I do keep coming back to in my head is the scene where Catherine McCormack infects Robert Carlyle, because that to me, part of me did wonder, although she obviously has the rage virus in her, did she sort of lure him in and infect him because she was raging that he left her behind? Essentially, he didn't know that her blood type was the kind that would sort of retain the virus but not actually like show any physical effects. He fucked off and left her and thought of himself. So part of me was like, oh, is this her revenge? That would be a really interesting line to pursue, but of course they did absolutely nothing with that storyline either. As I say, they kept talking about Andy's different coloured eye, same as his mother. That also went nowhere, other than the fact that they could potentially use the kids to do blood tests on them. But I think, I mean, as John said, and we've all said, it's screenwriting by committee. And I think all these different elements together, the sort of, you know, first person shooter, the horror jump scares, the family drama, the emotional stuff, I think there was an attempt to pull that all together through these sort of bigger set pieces, but I don't feel that ever plays out and gives you the tension and the suspense and the emotional pull that you felt like, as you said, Simmy, you wanted those characters to survive in 28 Days Later. You were quite happy for them to have a happy ending. I certainly didn't care enough for these kids to want them to will them through this film, or to want them to have the happy ending either. And I also feel like we talked about score and sound design in the first film. As we've said, the music is overused in this, but I also felt like there maybe wasn't enough sort of like silence or minimal sound in this film as well to give it the emotional impact it could have had. Would you agree with that? It feels a lot noisier this time around.
Yeah, it's
Yep,
very
definitely.
frenetic and not in the same way. It's very, with no patience for the film. There's no slow burn to it. It's a very impatient film that just wants to keep the action rolling, and to its detriment, no, because it doesn't give you time to breathe and care. I mean, you could argue when the kids go to London and they're kicking about and they go back to their old house, that's that sort of peaceful moment. But again, yeah, I just keep going back to these two characters of the kids that I don't think they were interesting enough to focus on. And I get from the point of the plot that their blood was important. Again, even that's quite a tired trope, isn't it? I mean, the whole idea of the infect. I mean, maybe more so new, especially with The Last of Us and things, but that's probably not helped looking back at this film retrospectively. It was just that sort of convenience aspect of it. But yeah, there was a lot of like the sound wasn't used in the same effectiveness. A lot was going on. Like I said, they used the score 3 times. I didn't like they just overused it. The film didn't really give you enough chance to kind of. There wasn't unsettling. It was too noisy and not in an annoying way, not an unsettling way. Like I said, it didn't know if it wanted to be this bigger, badder action version of the film that it basically was like, okay, here's the first film. It was almost like it wanted to be Aliens to Alien.
No, you're
It
right.
wasn't good enough to do it.
There was too much soundtrack, not just the needle drops, like you said, but
Mhm.
I noticed it really early on when they were in London, and there was soundtrack. There was the music in the background when they were like discovering the city and driving about and all that, and the wee scooter and everything. So it was noticeable the fact that there wasn't these sort of periods of silence, which was so effective in the first film, and I just didn't enjoy it as much. If I'd watched it more in isolation, because I watched it right after the first film, so I was able to
Ah,
immediately compare, and obviously it compared less favourably because of the strength of the first film. But even then, if I'd left it a couple of weeks, it would still be very noticeable, unfortunately, which is it's a bit of a shame. You know, I did want to like it, but I just felt it was pretty much inferior in every way. There was a nice sound element to it where they were all in the sort of the car park, and before even any of the infected actually came in to the room, there was lots of screaming and stuff, and that sounded very much like the infected as well. And I thought that's a nice wee touch. And then obviously when the infected were actually in there, and like you say, Thomas, you didn't know who was infected and who was still human, and
that did
the
work.
sound
Yeah.
levels, yeah, it increased. The sound levels increased, and you just didn't know whether it was the screams of the infected or was it screams from the people trying to get away. So that, yeah, that was good, but yeah, they burst that bubble pretty quickly, unfortunately, as well. So wasn't ideal. Something I'd like to say, obviously, you talk about the whole underlying rape thing in the first film. Now, in the second film, Robert Carlyle goes into a room where his wife is tied down on a bed, and then the first thing he does is he snogs her.
Yep. I think that both of these films, to a certain extent, have something to say about maybe perhaps the treatment of women in not even, it doesn't have to be a post-apocalyptic situation. It is just generally sort of like how women are treated when they're at their most vulnerable, I guess. Obviously, the apocalypse being the background for the vulnerability. But yeah, even the fact that the treatment of Catherine McCormick's character, she goes from being, you know, a woman and a mother trying to defend her house to a medical commodity. And therefore she's strapped down in a bed, she's left on her own, and there's no sort of like, you know, nobody comes in even just to check on her, to try and have a conversation with her, to try and support her emotionally throughout all of this. And her husband, his first thought is his own guilt about leaving her behind, and therefore tries to make it up to her with like a romantic kiss or whatever. Joke's on you, Robert Carlyle, because you're about to go absolutely fucking mental. But yeah, I think the treatment of women in both films is really quite striking in the fact that, and even like the Rose Byrne character as well, she's not believed, she's not listened to, you know, she's given the responsibility for the children purely because she has ovaries, I assume. And yeah, there is a lot of like this post-apocalyptic society, whatever you want to call it. It's very male-dominated, male opinions, male structures. You know, we just can't get a break from the fucking patriarchy. Even when people are literally ripping each other's heads off, it's like, no, we still have to listen to the men. And I also think as well that even the military in this film, although they've obviously tried to soften the portrayal with, as you say, somebody like talking about their wife and kids back home and Jeremy Renner having jokes and banter and stuff like that, they're still given the order to pick them off, whether they know that they're infected or civilian. It's like, no, just wipe them all out. Like, so actually the attempted repositioning of the military doesn't even make it through to the end of this film. They're still just following orders and killing people. So yeah, it's an interesting concept. It will be interesting to see what 28 years later looks like in terms of structures of society and any sort of female characters. I await with bated breath for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, and there's that. It will be. I mean, if it wasn't Danny Boyle that was making it, I would be very. If it wasn't like the original or the kind of the OG guys coming back type thing, I would be more skeptical of. Because that's Alex Garland writing it again, isn't it?
It is,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So they two, just incredible partnership. If it wasn't those two doing it, I'd be more skeptical of it because maybe as a film that doesn't work as a sequel. As a film, it's very self-contained from many, because you couldn't make a sequel the same style. You couldn't try and do it in the same style. You would need to do, and that's the thing with this film, you have to do something different. With 20 years later, they have to do something different. They've shot it differently. It's not going back to let's use the camcorders and that. That was lightning in a bottle. They're not going to replicate that. How they follow one, I am very curious to see. And saying, if this is Aliens to the first one's Alien, I hope it's not Alien 3. Although we do have a bald cult leader guy in it in Ray Fiennes, so maybe it will have that sort of element to it. No, I'm really looking forward to it. I think it looks great. It's got a great cast, and unlike the previous films, it's got a very well known cast this time.
Yeah, I feel like
which-
they've ramped up how well known the cast is each time. And I think interestingly, like we talked about how the first film has like this notion of hope at the end. Obviously, this film doesn't. There's this notion that it's going to, like, there is the insinuation that it's just the UK this has happened to, right? It's like it's a completely sort of cut off island, and the rest of the world is continuing as normal. Like everybody else is going about their daily lives. It's just the UK. But of course, this film ends with the infected hitting like Paris through the metro. So it even ends on a completely different note and a much darker note in comparison to the first film, which, as you said, Simi, is slightly imbued with this kind of sense of hope. Do you think that'll inform how 28 years later opens, or has like different types of themes, different levels of violence? How do you think the ending of this film is going to impact the next sequel? Or do you think they're just not going to touch this at all because it's a different writing team?
Well, as you were saying as well, John, is like this is the first of a new trilogy. Did you say?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think it's going to leave much hope at the end of it.
No, I wouldn't think so.
Because-
Not based on the trailer.
Yeah, it does look a bit, it's definitely leaning into the more grim post-apocalyptic society, isn't it?
But even just the trailer itself, if you watch the trailer for 28 years later, it's more enjoyable to watch than the whole of 28 weeks later, I would say. There's more inventiveness in that trailer alone than there is in that whole film, which is poor, obviously.
Yeah.
I saw it last week when I was at the cinema, saw the trailer for it again, and it's just great. And you just go, oh, yeah, definitely want to see this film. Definitely want to get involved.
And again, it's like, don't want to be too critical of the director alone with this. You know, as you mentioned, John, it's a filmmaking by committee type thing. There's probably a lot more happening than just. I mean, in the first one, it's quite clearly a singular vision. There's no getting away from that. In this, it does feel a lot messier. You kind of wonder if there's. I could be wrong. This could be exactly the film they wanted to make. It might not have been. Who knows? I've not looked enough
Well, the
into that.
director is one of
aspect
the
it.
co-writers, so you assume that he is following his own vision at some points anyway. So
Yeah, I think there was a lot of rewrites to the script, if I recall. 'Cause I think Danny Boyle did want to direct it, but he went to do Sunshine instead. Or he was caught up in Sunshine, which, if you've not seen that, that's a great film.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
You've seen it, maybe? Cillian Murphy,
I think that's
Chris Evans.
I think that's the gap in my Danny Boyle filmography. Is that's maybe the one film I've not seen actually.
People think that the ending is quite split opinion, but I mean, this is also pre-Captain America Chris Evans, where
Oh, okay.
it's very much if you've known him through Fantastic Four or stuff like that, or anything, you might go, I can recognise him, but this isn't like movie star Chris Evans, and it's still Cillian Murphy before he's a really big name as well. But it's a sci-fi horror that I don't think gets enough credit. It's a great film.
Yeah.
Okay.
Didn't think the song and dance number at the end really sort of fitted in, though, but you know, there's.
I have no idea if you're taking the piss or not. Yeah,
I know.
yeah. I do think that this, unfortunately, as a sequel, does not work. But would you still encourage people to watch it before they go and see 28 years later, or do you just think this is a skip and a miss?
Don't know, because I don't know how it ties in. That's the thing. My gut tells me it's probably a skip and a miss. You don't have to have seen it. But to be honest with you, I could be wrong, and you could like these kids could be the main characters in the new one. You know, you're like, I don't know. There could be allusions back to Idris Elba could pop back up for all I know. I don't know. I think I'm a bit of a completionist in that sense as well, so I would say watch it. Make your mind up. Like I said, looking back at the reviews, it's better reviewed than I remembered. I think it's. I mean, using Rotten Tomatoes as the consensus
a marker for yeah.
Yeah, it did get more favourable reviews than critical ones. That surprised me, but I didn't like it. John didn't like it. I don't know anybody did like it personally.
Yeah. It's not a film that I would like. If it was a standalone film, would I recommend it? No, absolutely not. But as you say, it's a wee bit of a completionist in me that's like, but you would probably just want to watch the two of them before you go and see 28 years later anyway, but just go in with the knowledge that you're not going to enjoy this, and there's too many plot conveniences and not enough like actual drama and tension in order for this to live up to expectations. It does seem strange. I know obviously Danny Boyle was caught up in another project, as you've said, but it seems strange to give away like something like this to an entirely, I mean, I've never heard of any of those writers or directors before, so it does seem strange to give away such a hit to, as we've said, filmmaking by committee. It seems a bit of a strange move, but that's what it is.
It's on Disney Plus, so if you've got Disney Plus, give it a watch. You know, it's. So I'm just looking at I'm trying to load up Rotten Tomatoes here to see. Even the audience score's quite high. So 72% for the critic, 66% from the audience.
You find out, if you think about it, we had the same issues with Rob Roy because there was an awful lot of positive reviews for that. I think it was mostly from Americans. Sometimes you can't really trust these aggregating.
Oh, you can.
Yeah.
You really can, especially. But a point is, I'm surprised that both are fairly high in that kind of sense, because it's always funny. I watched a film the other week.
Well, there's a big disparity between the two.
Oh yeah, it was like 90% by critics and like 20 by the audience. I'm watching this going, yeah, but the audience are writing this one. But yeah, there's disparity. Actually, a disparity that gets me. That makes me think. And when I see something that's more kind of aligned, which this is, I'm like, that surprised me, because I don't remember anybody being favourable about this film. That's the thing. I don't remember anybody really talking about it with kindness. Anybody really liking it and enjoying it. That's more surprised me in that kind of sense. But yeah, from a pusher's point of view, watch it, may as well.
Yeah,
it's not terrible to watch. Watch it going up.
No.
You can watch it. It's fine. You won't want to turn it off or anything, but especially in comparison to the first one, you're going to judge it a lot. And again, fairly or unfairly, that's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
From what I've read about the new film, they've kind of pulled back from the ending of 28 Weeks Later, and the whole, moving on to France and everything. I think it's back to being self-contained within the UK, which has led some people to think of it as some sort of Brexit.
Oh no, so we've gone from post 9/11 to Brexit. Oh,
yeah. Well, that's just some chat. Obviously, not many people have seen the film, so it's. I suspect there will be nods to the second film in that, but whether they actually expand on it, I very much doubt, because this is much the baby of Alex Garland and Danny Boyle here, isn't it? Rather than the actual, like Fox, for instance. I think they bought the rights back to the film, so they are able to develop the sort of sequels in whatever way they want. And they're obviously going for it in a big way, obviously with plans for a couple of films. So yeah. But yeah, I would say watch it, if for no other reason than, like you say, Thomas, completist reasons. And most people are completists when you're talking about film franchises, aren't they?
So obviously 28 Years Later comes out in UK cinemas in June this year. So obviously you can listen to this podcast beforehand to refresh yourself before you jump into the new film. In the meantime, you can find us on all of the usual social channels, including YouTube and Blue Sky. And if you want to drop John an email, you can email podcasts@moviescramble.co.uk. But until our next episode, it is bye from me.
Bye.
Bye.